Welcome to SEC Sports Roundtable. This is your host, Shane Bailey. We've got an exciting podcast lined up for you here today. We've got a somewhat full roundtable here. We've got a new person to join us, and we're gonna go on and say welcome, John.
Welcome.
John Schultz, you want to introduce yourself, say anything about you or anything like that?
John Schultz. I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I've lived in Knoxville, Tennessee for 7 years, and I just moved to Nashville about 2.5 years ago.
Okay, and if you can't tell now, he is going to be a Tennessee Vol fan. We all have our allegiance here at the round table. So if you're new to the round table, we're not ashamed to root for our teams here. So that's what we like about that. We get a little friendly banter going sometimes about that, and that's what makes this a little bit different. We're not going to be a talking head or just some figurehead that's got to try to stay politically incorrect. We've got our sides, and at times we're not afraid to tell you how we feel about that. And someone who's definitely not afraid to tell you how he feels about Ole Miss is Blair Smiley, the Mississippi State fan.
That's right. It's good to be back. It's everybody's got their faults over here with the Tennessee stuff, so and of course the Kentucky stuff. So
yeah, we are in mourning again. It doesn't take long as a Kentucky fan to have our ups and downs, but looking at the schedule, there shouldn't be too many more stumbles ahead of us, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Kentucky Wildcats later in the podcast. But do want to say welcome, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us, and thank you everyone that's out there listening in to the SEC Sports Roundtable. If you've stumbled upon this podcast, we want to thank you to do that. Don't be afraid to go out and subscribe to the podcast. One way to do that is on iTunes. Just go out there, look for SEC Sports. We're going to be way up at the top. If you've been a fan and been listening for a while, go out to iTunes and also, give a review. We always like to see those reviews, and that just gets us higher up in the rankings, gets it out there more, and just lets us know that you're listening to us. Another way to do that is if you have a smartphone is Stitcher Radio. It's a free app. In any podcast you listen to, whether you stumbled upon the website or an RSS feed or however you've been able to listen to it, it's free. So all these ways we're doing this. This is something free we do for you guys. It's something we enjoy doing. So go out there and Stitcher Radio, iTunes, or on the website, which is SEC Sports Roundtable. We're just going to go on and get all the housekeeping stuff out of the way early today. We're on a Facebook at SECSRT. If you look for SEC Sports Roundtable, we're there, as well as on Twitter, SECSRT. We are in the midst of two-a-days. If for those who aren't familiar with that, our goal is to try to get 2 extra followers a day for the month of December for every day, both on our Facebook and our Twitter pages. So if you're not out there and you're not following us, it's a great way to do that. You can be informed when we do some live blogs. We've done a couple of those, and as this bowl season's upon us here in the next few weeks, we're going to start doing some more of those. So it's a good way to become involved in the community itself. So we want you guys to have input, and that's a great way to do that, is to get back and reach out to us on Twitter or Facebook. So all of that being said, we're going to get right into some news of the week, and we're going to kind of focus that news currently on the top part of it into some coaching changes. For those that listened to the podcast last week, we hit up on the Hugh Freeze hiring at Ole Miss. I don't think that came as too big a surprise. He was on one of the short lists. Archie Manning, I think his quote was, "We've got our man," and it wasn't Peyton.
That's right.
But Blair, tell us what your thoughts are on that. I know you've been silently holding that back for the last couple of weeks, but bring us up to speed down in Mississippi. What's going on in that situation?
Well, I think from Archie and their standpoint, I think they kind of had this guy. I think they knew that he would accept the job from the get-go, and I think he wowed them a little bit. He's a young, energetic, kind of passionate guy. And I've actually had a couple of Ole Miss friends that I talked to.
So let me stop you there. They don't want to be Tennessee and have get turned down to the dance all the time. Like,
it all depends on who you actually ask. I know that there were several reports that Larry Fedora actually turned them down, and then after the championship game in the Conference USA, after they beat Houston, they went after him again, just as kind of a last-ditch effort before they turned their attention to Hugh Freeze. And it's a pretty amazing story. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, the guy 7 years ago was at Briarcrest Academy in Memphis, so he's a high school coach. The whole Michael Orr blindside thing that everybody kind of knows about him, but he's done a good job. I mean, he's proven he's won. I think he's a guy that would have stayed at Arkansas State for 2 more years, won 9 or 10 ball games like he did this year, and he would have been probably a hot commodity. And I think Ole Miss is just choosing to kind of jump the gun on that and take a leap of faith that this is somebody that they can kind of build with. He's kind of a passionate guy that I think will get out on the recruiting trail, and so we'll actually see. And it all kind of depends on his staff. I mean, I think he's I think what they needed is just a shot in the arm, and so it's he's going to have to win to get the fan base behind him, because there's a lot of them that are going to be, Hugh Freeze. He was making $202,000 at Arkansas State and was the lowest paid coach, and now he's an SEC coach 7 years after being a high school coach. So it's a pretty fast track.
But they got him on the cheap too. I mean, I think you were giving me some numbers there.
Yeah, I think it's a $1.5 million.
In the SEC realm, that's
that's a bargain. Yeah, I mean, Mississippi State paid Dan Mullen 1.2 for the first 2 years that he was there. So that's kind of how you have to go. I mean, the guy goes from 202,000 to 1.5. That's a pretty good little 750% increase right there.
That's definitely a change in lifestyle, we'll say. But
yeah.
But as far as SEC ranks, as far as what the coaches get paid these days, that's well low on the pecking order, and quite a bit less than a previous coach at Ole Miss.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. I mean, they're having to pay a 5-year buyout to Houston is, I think, how they're structuring that. So they're paying 1.25 for the next 5 years, which is $6 million. And then, and in the state of Mississippi, you're a state employee, so the max contract you can have is a 4-year. So, so every year they have to, kind of have a handshake and, kind of re-up that. So
now, he was there before, right?
Yeah, he came over with Michael Orr. So if you watch The Blind Side and the whole NCAA investigation and the steering to Ole Miss, but he was a high school coach, and Ed Orgeron gave him a spot as, kind of a, I guess, football operations, one of those,
You got me, Michael Orr. I'm going to get you a spot.
Right, exactly. And but he's a really he's a big Christian-based guy.
And Christian or non-Christian. I wasn't making a jab at Ole Miss for that. I mean, that happens almost in every university around. When you get a high school coach that's got a star prospect that you bring into a university, there's many times that they land a position.
He was a director of recruiting at that time, so that's kind of his. His thing. I mean, he's more of a salesman, and see, Ole Miss hasn't had that really. I mean, Houston Nutt was, supposedly the reverend or whatever, and this guy truly is a reverend. He truly is somebody that can kind of go into a living room and preach, if that makes any sense. But he is, he's one of those guys that was at Ole Miss for 3 years, then he went to Lambeth. And went 20-5 in 2 years there. Then he went to Arkansas State as the offensive coordinator. They went 4-6, and they fired the coach and handed him the job. And he went 10-2 in the first year, and went 8-0 in the Sun Belt.
Yes.
Yeah, and beat Troy 41-14 the last week of the season. And Arkansas beat Troy by like 7 points in Arkansas this year. So, when you beat Troy like they did, he's got an offensive spread, but it's the same thing. And kind of long-winded about this, but it's kind of the same thing that a lot of offense, and I think we'll actually talk about another one coming into the league, where it's all about your staff, because the SEC defense is just a total different ballgame. I think most people actually, when we got Mullen from Florida, that was one of the things that, he was very offensive-minded, but if you actually look at the success, if you would call it success, but I would actually call it success over the last 3 years, it's been mostly consistently defensive-driven. The offense has been pretty sporadic, and when it's been good, it's good, but when it's been bad, it hasn't been very good. So he's had a harder time, I think, staying consistent from an offensive standpoint, but he's kind of found that in the SEC you got to maintain a defensive effort, to get kind of where you're going.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, is there any rumblings around right now about who they're going to bring in as the D coordinator? I would assume they're going to want somebody with a lot of experience, if not NFL experience.
Well, that's he's bringing 4 guys from Arkansas State, and one of them is Womack is his last name. He was actually under Houston Nutt at Arkansas, in the mid part of his tenure, and he was actually out of coaching for a year whenever he came and asked him. In 1 year, went basically turned Arkansas State from the worst defense to the best defense. So he's got a long history. He was at Southern Miss for a little bit. So he's coming from Arkansas State with him. So we'll kind of see how that is. He'll take a little bit of time, I think, trying to fill out his staff. But that's who he's got for his defense coordinator.
And you hit on the defense part of the SEC, and that's really, if you look over the last, 6 years of championships for this year counting in the BCS history. Look at those teams. They've all had a great defense. And we've talked about that so many times on the podcast that sometimes it just takes a serviceable offense. And Alabama, granted, they've got Trent Richardson that can run the ball, but you get a decent running back and a quarterback that doesn't make a lot of stupid mistakes and a great defense, all of a sudden you can compete in the SEC.
Yeah. The problem with Hugh Freeze is that he's having to go straight and compete in the SEC West, which – right now, it's just a bugaboo, it's just one of those things that, Mississippi State the last 2 years has averaged both seasons holding opponents under 20 points a game, and it's like 3rd or 4th in the SEC, and but you can't win in the West. It's one of those things where it's a tough place to actually make a living. So.
You mentioned, a tough place to play is the SEC West, and another coach, and we might as well start talking about him. It's A&M. They've got a brand new coach into a brand new conference, and I don't think it's actually been official yet, but everybody believes they're going to be in the West, and so, or at least this year they'll play in the West. So they're going to come in with another new coach, and that's Sumlin, who was at Houston, who was one bad game really away from playing for a BCS title, or not a title but a BCS bowl game, except if it wasn't for their just awful performance the last game of the season. And that's Kevin Sumlin now takes over at A&M for Sherman. So
I think that what you were talking about before, I think with him, he's going to bring that spread type offense. It's going to be really important for him to hire a good defensive coordinator. I think that's going to be the biggest thing. Texas A&M, they got a great fan base. They're going to, they'll travel really well, but they're definitely going to need to hire somebody good. I'm pretty sure Sherman was taking care of most of the defensive stuff when he was there.
Yeah, and Mississippi State actually played Houston last year and the year before, so got a little familiarity with them. We kind of lucked out last year because Case Keenum actually went down. They lost 2 quarterbacks against UCLA like 3 weeks before we were supposed to play, and which was a little bit because they came to Starkville and beat them 3 years ago with Case Keenum. But but the thing about it was in both of those games they just had no defense whatsoever. We could just kind of compete with that, and you saw that against Southern Miss. In the Conference USA Championship, Southern Miss is a good ball team, but they ran on them like it was no big deal, and that's been his biggest deal, is that he's put the points up, but they've also never been able to slow anybody down. And then you also have the compact of Art Briles, who's at Baylor now, was actually at Houston, in his last, kind of a crazy deal, but he's the one that actually had Cobb that was at Houston that Sumlin took over, and he actually recruited Keenum to come there, and then he also got Robert Griffin III to go to Baylor. So he kind of had a nice place to go into, which I think he's doing at Texas A&M with Sherman, because I don't think that thing was in a any way, shape, or form a bad situation. No. But it is. I think what you're talking about, defense, is going to be a big deal.
But realistically though, the Big 12's never had a problem scoring. It's always high scoring matchups. It's defense that's their Achilles heel in any of those. You think of the big teams. Sometimes you got the Oklahoma and Nebraskas, and no longer Nebraska over there. But, that's always been a weak spot is that, can they stop the other opponents? It's like who scores last wins kind of games over there in the Big 12, and that doesn't fly over here in the SEC.
Yeah, they'll have to learn it real quick because it's not something that, you can get by with in the Big 12. And I think Texas A&M's a place that, my goodness, they're paying, a $14 million buyout or $16 million buyout to get to the SEC, and then they just, Sherman got, $6 million. So they're forking out $20+ million just to get over into the conference. So I think that they'll have all the resources to get what they need done.
I was when I was looking at this earlier, I was kind of thinking to myself who they might hire as their D coordinator, and one of the names that came up to me was the younger brother of Bob Stoops over from Arizona, who just got fired.
Yeah.
I know that someone has ties. He was the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma when they were, putting up huge numbers. That might be a direction that he might go.
Did Ohio State ever get Mike Stoops? Because Urban Meyer supposedly talked with him, or
it hasn't been official.
It hasn't been official.
There's no.
And a little sidebar there. This is totally off topic, and it's not anything to do about the SEC. But how the Ohio State gets a waiver to have 2 coaching staff is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen.
That's
Especially
crazy.
when the next day they're going in front of the infractions committee. How you allow a waiver of any type when you don't even know what they've done? It's the most ridiculous thing. If I was Michigan, I would just be highly ticked off. My coaches have to recruit and coach a bowl game.
If I were any team in NCAA that had a coaching change right now, I'd be going up.
If I was Hugh Freeze, well, they're not going to the bowl game. But, if I was North Carolina, I'm A&M. If I was UCLA, any of those.
Arizona, is Arizona? But any of those teams that have had that coaching change, it's like, what makes them any different?
Well, that's the weird thing to me is, Sumlin and Hugh Freeze, neither one is going to coach their team in the bowl game. So you know what? I don't understand why. Is it just because he's part of that staff? Because Urban already said he's going to keep him on?
No, it's actually kind of an obscure rule, and but you have to actually get a waiver. It's not something that's unprecedented, supposedly, but just the fact that they
because of the profile of Ohio State.
And what to me just makes it even more ridiculous is the fact that the next day, after they got the waiver, the next day they're going in front of the committee of infractions. So not only you're having a meeting on the infractions that they committed, that you still don't have a definite answer or any type of rules, and you're going to give them a waiver on anything. That just doesn't make any sense to me. But it is the NCAA.
Well, something that doesn't make sense to Will Muschamp is Coach Weiss. And just the blowout of left field to come in and say, oh, by the way, I'm not going to be here next year, and I'm going to go coach Kansas. Thanks for not letting you. I'm not going to let you know anything went on. I'm just going to go do this.
Do you think he was more disappointed that he didn't know, or the fact that he's just? I don't think they ever really got along.
Well, I could tell you, Will Muschamp was probably jumping for joy when it actually happened. I just think it was just interesting. I guess the reason they found out he didn't know is because he was totally caught off guard when he went to a press conference and it had broke and he didn't know anything about it. So, but I don't think he's losing any sleep over it. I think it's an opportunity for him to go make a more reasonable hire because it wasn't something that was paying any dividends. That's for sure. And Charlie Weiss is just, from a health standpoint, you would think that going there, he was going there with his son being on the staff at Florida, and he was going to kind of go there and retool things and not be the head guy, and to get back into coaching, like being a head coach, is one thing, but to do it at Kansas, if Turner Gill can resurrect Buffalo and he can't do anything with Kansas in 2 years, then what's Charlie Weiss going to do?
Yeah. And I don't know if you guys heard too, but a little SEC tie. I heard that Fulmer's name was being thrown around for a little while. And I don't know if that was like,
for the Kansas job.
And I just thought about it, Mangino, Charlie Weiss, Fulmer. They like him big in Kansas, I guess.
They like those nice stale press conferences.
Corn-fed. Oh, wait, it's Nebraska, isn't it? That's still out in corn country. But that one did. I think you're you're right on target there. I don't think that Muschamp was, at the end of the day, upset that this has happened. Weiss came in and it was all talk for him. talking about how they're going to be able to bring in a pro style offense, and then realize that with Rainey and Demps that wasn't going to work. So we're going to run the offense with the guys that we have. Here the speed, we're going to utilize it, but then Brantley's not designed to be that type of quarterback. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. And they just didn't have the right people. They didn't have the right pieces to fit into that puzzle to make it work. And I think Charlie Weiss is a genius when he's got the right pieces to do what he needs to do with an offense.
And the weird thing to me is that after this all happened, Muschamp said he was going to stick with the pro style offense. So that to me is a little bit odd. I don't know their personnel exactly, but
to me that makes the most sense long term. The problem with it is that you were trying to run Rainey and Demps in the backfield where you had that speed, so you need that spread offense with the triple option, all these different things that you could maneuver into there and throw those pieces in to keep everybody off guard. That's not the same backfield you're going to have coming into this year. But you're still going to have Brantley, who is a pro style quarterback.
What about Driscoll? Isn't he like the quarterback of the future there? And he's more of like a Tebow.
Yeah, I think they've got a little. To be honest with you, Muschamp's got a lot of issues that he's got to deal with, but he's also second in recruiting rankings this year. I mean, he's flat out recruiting the ever living mess out of it, which should happen in Florida, but. What baffles me is that even Urban Meyer and when Mullen was there, they couldn't land that big back. They always were kind of like a running back with committee, Percy Harvin and all that kind of stuff, and they always had the scat backs. And when they were successful,
speed as opposed to pound.
Right.
They don't have the Richardson or the.
And if you ever saw Urban at Bowling Green and at Utah, they had the big stud 6'2", 230-pound running back, and that's ideally how they like to kind of run, because it was really a run-oriented, not really a spread pass offense. It was really run dominant, and they got a little bit of personnel things they got to figure out. That's for sure.
Now, I don't know if either one of you know, is Fred Taylor's son coming in? Is it next year or the year after?
I don't know.
I know he's a big guy. And I know that they said he was obviously his dad played there, so I would assume he's almost a Florida lock. But I didn't know any of the rumblings of that. I know he's big, and he's going after Emmitt Smith's record, which is people said was untouchable.
Wow. I don't have that. I don't have that information. The recruiting side of football is just beyond me. I don't have the time or energy to be able to figure all that out. But that would be a big find for them. That's what the kind of person they need in that backfield. So speaking of backfields they're missing a hole or two is Auburn. I don't know if you guys heard about that.
Heard about that Dyer.
That just came out sometime this evening. We're recording on a Sunday. But Mike Dyer's been suspended indefinitely. I mean, he's been their leading rusher the last 2 seasons. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, he was, I think, behind Trent Richardson, the best running back in the league, and from a statistic standpoint. But
you're saying without Lattimore being because of his injury?
Yeah, right. Okay. But because it was kind of interesting because I actually saw Brad, my buddy that's an Auburn guy, and he mentioned it to me earlier today at the party that we were at, and he was saying it looks like he's done. Like he's played his last game at Auburn, and so he's got some issues that he's pretty much done there at Auburn. So that totally caught me off guard. So that's a big deal.
And he was a sophomore. Now, if he gets let go of the team, will he have to set out a year if he goes to a different school?
I don't know how that works, if you're dismissed or what, but
I think the same rules apply. I think it's 2 in the SEC and 1 somewhere else, unless you go to if you go to JC.
So he might end up at a JUCO and pull a Cam Newton.
Yeah, but see, I don't think he can because he's got 2 years under him, so he can't go JUCO route. He can go because he's played 2 seasons. In JUCO, you can only play 2 seasons. So
could he redshirt?
He could redshirt, but he can't. He would never have an ability. He would never have a ability to or an eligibility year to play. So he would either have to go to another, FBS school and sit out, or he could go to an FCS because he's not a senior. Isn't that how that works now?
Yeah.
If you got 2 years of eligibility, you don't have to sit out. But if you're a junior going into your senior, there's they're now making them sit out because they're taking advantage of that rule or something. It's a new one now, something to that effect.
And when you're dismissed, that's different than you choosing to leave. So maybe there's some loopholes that they can take advantage of. Maybe he can go to a school that doesn't offer the same programs, because isn't that a waiver? Oregon's quarterback that played at Ole Miss 2 years ago,
Jeremiah Masoli,
he used that as a.
Well, yeah, he used the waiver of he had graduated,
and they didn't have the program,
and so he just decided
That's
he was
right.
going to be a Parks and Recreation.
Same like the
Masters.
The guy from Wisconsin, Russell.
Yeah, and Mississippi State had one of those. And this year is the last year that actually was an automatic waiver. Now I believe it's not. I think the SEC picked that up to not allow any school to even do that anymore. But one of our backup linebackers was a Clemson guy that had graduated and wanted to get closer to home.
So we'll have to see what ends up happening with Mike Dyer there. But it looks like he's possibly ran his last play in an Auburn jersey.
That's big news, man.
It is. I mean, because the people behind him. I mean, he was it McCaleb.
Yeah.
And Mason were the two backs behind him, and combined they barely had 650 yards.
McCaleb's not an every down back. He's one of those little scat. Scat backs.
He was a freshman, and I think was McCaleb. Is he a junior?
He's the same as Dyer, I think.
Was he a sophomore?
He may be a year older.
But still, that leaves a big hole in an Auburn Tigers offense that was really took a big hit last year.
He was a junior, so he'd be a senior next year.
Yeah, so big things on the horizon there for Auburn. I wonder what that's going to do.
Good. I hope more of them decide to leave.
Especially with their quarterback situation. I don't really think they have that figured out either.
No, I don't think so.
They got about 3 quarterbacks, and all of them are average, if not above. I know they had a freshman they're really high on, but
Kyle Frazier's the one that they want to eventually make into something, but.
Well, on the coaching news, I think there's only 1 or 2 other little pieces. Arkansas, this isn't huge news for anybody unless you're a Razorbacks fan, but they have a new defensive coordinator. Paul Haynes was just hired, and I don't know a whole lot about him. He was on Petrino's staff when he was at Jacksonville.
Now, did they also lose their O coordinator? Did he not take the job at UAB?
Yeah, he McGee. I think. Yeah, he left, and his brother's coming back to coach with him, right?
I think you're saying. Yeah.
It's Paul Petrino, I think, is what it is. So
okay.
he's coming back. He was
same system, I'm sure.
Yeah. So Arkansas is starting to fill a few small pieces that have, opened up and. Razorback world. Now, what about the news for Mullen? Has that changed any? I think he's pretty much squelched any rumors that he's going to Penn State.
Yeah, I mean, he came out. I guess he kind of got a little bit squirrely on some of the social media with a guy in Pennsylvania saying that he was lined up to be interviewed last week, but Mullen came out and released a statement that him nor his agent or a Mississippi State official. So when a coach says that, it kind of lets you know that. Most of them like to hide the agent part of it, that they're not talking. So the fact that he did that kind of lets you know. And I personally think that Penn State really doesn't know what they're – I mean, they just kind of got a committee together, and I don't have a feeling that they're on any type of fast track to find a coach. It's not something that's going to happen within the next week. So I'll be interested to see how it develops and where it goes from there. But they have no football people whatsoever on their search committee. It's like 6 people, and it's a volleyball coach that's been there forever, and a softball coach, and an economics teacher, and something else. So, they're doing the whole political correct thing.
That's going to be a tough one to fill, I think. Talk about sanctions. I mean, you might not know for a couple years. You might take the job. I just think it's going to be a hard one. I maybe an assistant type coordinator.
See, and I don't know what they're going to do, because I've got kind of 2 sides of that. The only thing that's hesitant that I would be hesitant about is the whole NCAA's lack of institutional control, or whatever they call that, because there was no football related whatsoever anything broken. Now, it is the true definition of the lack of institutional control, because
that's like when you get hired at a place and you've got your job description and then that says other duties as needed.
Right,
You know, that's kind of that catch-all phrase that the NCAA has in their back pocket to say, oh yeah, by the way, institutional control.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I don't think that they're going to have anything that's going to be football related probations. I think that they're going to have to just clean house with everybody that was affiliated whatsoever. And I think somebody like Mullen, that I think that's as good as they can actually get, to be honest with you. I think it would be a good get for him, but he can also, he's from that area, but they would have to pay over $4 million a year. They would have to give him time, and he would have unbelievable resources, especially to get the brand back. And so, it all depends. If they seriously wanted him, I think that they would be smart enough to go and say, I think that they will actually target a person that they can, can kind of come in. But I think they're going to be more towards a kind of a build it from the ground up type of person, like an like a Al. What is his name at Miami?
Al Grohl.
Yeah, that kind of
or Al Golden.
person.
I'm sorry, Al Golden.
Yeah, Al Golden. That type of person that's actually taken and kind of built a program. It's kind of got a history of it, because I think that's what they're going to need is somebody with a little bit of time.
Yeah. What about Greg Schiano from Rutgers? Y'all have any?
I don't know what ties. I think that he might be a little bit too high of a profile for them. I don't know. I think that you're going to see them slow play this. And give it a little more time to see so they can kind of see what's coming down the horizon.
And to be honest with you, I would not be totally surprised that they actually
keep the coach,
keep that one, whatever his name is, and just keep him for an interim year, and just because what it sounds like, unless you grow up in that area, that whole which encompasses a lot of area, all the Northeast over into New Jersey and all of that area. It's kind of a Penn State area, but outside of that, there's going to be a lot of kids that are they're just not going to want to deal with the stigma that's going to be there over the next couple of years, especially with all these things and the lawsuits coming out, and Sandusky getting arrested again, taken to jail wearing a Penn State jacket.
Yeah, I agree, and I kind of, the more this is starting to unfold, the more I'm leaning towards that they're going to say, you know what, we're going to keep that interim tag on you for one more year, and give him a good salary to say, you're going to help stop the bleeding, so to speak, and let things kind of settle down for a year, get their game in place, find the right guy, because I will tell you what, this is going to be their most important hire, because this is going to have to be somebody that's going to have the utmost moral character, like Paterno was supposedly it had. You're going to have to get somebody that's going to want to be there long term. You're not going to want a coach that's just going to be there a couple years and gone. So they don't want to have a revolving door start there at Penn State. That's just not what can happen. And so they might be best served to say, we can take the hit this year and suffer through this for the good to get the right coach for the long term. Let's play this out one more year and see what kind of happens. With that being said, you brought up, outside of that little region, you're right. They do have unlimited resources. They've got great facilities. They've got a huge stadium. So they have all the core pieces that's not going to go away from Penn State. The problem is you're competing against the SEC. You're competing against teams in the Big 12 and the Pac-12 where, let's face it, would you rather go to Pennsylvania and play football, or would you rather go to the Southeastern Conference where you can wear shorts in January? That there's a big difference in climate, and you're really starting to see some of that, and how the SEC can win, and even the Big 12 and Pac-12 for some situations now. Oregon, Washington, and the state excluded. Some of those teams from the Pac-12. I'm thinking more USC, Arizona State, UCLA. There is a distinct advantage when you come to a kid's house and you're recruiting that individual, and they're living in the Midwest where it's cold, and you're coming there in December and over these next couple weeks, and you're all bundled up in a coat, and you can show them pictures of palm trees and oranges. Mm-hmm. That's a big win. So, that's I'm kind of leaning towards that.
And I don't know. I don't know how much pressure they're going to get to just have to just clean house, and anybody that ever had a breath in that facility is just no longer there. And I'm thinking that might actually be what happens, but
they might be able to get a 1-year reprieve on that to say, hey, let's make sure everything's, for the good of the university. We've got people that were not involved but still are familiar with the program. Let's keep them here. Let's get through this, and then we'll get the right hire. I don't know. You're right, though. They could come out and say, let's clean house. And
yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised either way. I guess that's really it in the coaching changing news. We brought up Michael Dyer as far as a player change. I think there was one other player change that kind of happened, and it affects a team you're somewhat familiar with there, Blair.
What's that? Give me a list.
A little Brett's nephew.
Oh yeah.
By the way,
yeah, I totally went blank. Not Dylan Favre is leaving Mississippi State, which probably nobody knows who he is other than he's kin to Brett, but he is transferring out of state and going to Pearl River Community College, and it's a pretty wise decision by him, I think.
I think so too. I mean, Ralph is a senior, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, he's gone, but it was evident this year that Favre was not going to be number 2.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, and
that happened after the second game.
Yeah, I mean, Favre got a little bit of playing time, and it was more kind of gimmicky type of things. And I think it's Mullen's way of kind of breeding the competition that he tries to have from that standpoint. But they got a redshirt freshman, Dak Prescott, that's going to be pretty much a bull from that standpoint. So I don't think he was going to see himself. He was playing from a disadvantage anyway. I mean, he's in the SEC. I mean, I don't care how good you are, 6 foot or shorter, it's pretty tough to play quarterback. And so he was going to have a hard time. And I think the kid needs to play, and I think he wants to play. I don't think he's a kind of a personality that's going to sit on the bench and play spot duty every little bit, for 3 years. So he's going to go to Pearl River, reopen, his opportunities, and he'll go somewhere, and he'll probably put up massive stats. And when you throw for almost 12,000 yards in high school, you can kind of sling it across all across the place. So not a real big loss for Mississippi State from my end, but it's just one of those things that you just kind of deal with, move on.
Well, speaking of moving on, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about something that happened yesterday, and that was the Heisman Trophy being awarded. And we'll not spend a lot of time on it, only because the SEC didn't win. But RG3, Robert Griffin III, in his Superman socks, came on stage and collected that trophy. But the thing I'm just going to mention about that, and I'll let you get your guys' opinion, is it's so funny to how fickle those voters are. Because 2 weeks prior, you were looking at ESPN, and they've got all these individuals that are on staff, and so they know what they're voting because they're polling them. And they've got to answer these polls, I guess, as part of their employment, because they've got pretty stout numbers there. But if you saw that, Trent Richardson was projected number 1 2 weeks ago, and then he didn't. And that's one thing about the opportunity Alabama didn't have by playing that week. RG3 got to play, and then all of a sudden he leapfrogged them, and all of a sudden Richardson comes in third. And not even close. Yeah. But it was funny how going into that week that he was, it projected to almost to really compete for first place. And what it did do, though, was it brought Honey Badger out of being invited into the top 5 at least. Yeah. So I mean, the SEC did have 2 people out of the top 5, and I'll get what you guys think about it.
Well, I think with Trent Richardson, I think the thing that hurt him the most, too, was that Monty Ball had, a couple monster games there at the end of the season. So, when you're looking at it from a running back standpoint, again, if you're looking at statistics and not schedule, I think that definitely took some votes away from him. And, Stanford lost. So, Luck wasn't, he didn't look as good either.
Luck's problem was he had his worst game on, he was on national television, which is in prime time where most of the country could see him, which they don't typically get to see anyway. They're kind of at a disadvantage out west anyway. And then the one game that everybody kind of concentrated on, he didn't perform very well in that one.
You're referring to USC?
Yeah, that's what I meant, not Oregon.
And I think what also surprised me is that you didn't have Case Keenum one bad game the entire year. And I wouldn't even call it bad. He still threw for 300 yards, but I would say 3 weeks ago he was going to get invited.
Yeah,
he was probably a contender.
I think that it was just, I mean, you really had like 7 or 8 that were all kind of jumbled in there together. And I mean, normally they're going to bring 3, and they ended up bringing 5. 4 typically at the most. But I mean, to have 5 just kind of tells you that. But it was funny because the last week there's I can't remember the site where the guy has been predicting the Heisman for the last, because basically he polls all throughout the country. So he had been predicting it. He said that RG3 was going to win, and it wasn't even going to be close. And he said if anything was any different, he would be totally surprised. And so I think what I actually got out of that was that we're right in the middle of the SEC country. So it was kind of just a afterthought that, once Trent Richardson threw the kid from Auburn out of bounds and ran for 57 yards after having, 100 and some odd, what was it, 203 yards against Auburn, that he pretty much clinched it. But it was, I mean, the Big 12, I thought, did a pretty good job of stretching those games out and making sure that they played those games on the weekend of the championship. So it allowed, for Oklahoma State, didn't they play as well?
They did. Yeah, we're not going to have a championship game, but we're sure going to have a game that weekend.
Right, and so I thought that was pretty smart from their standpoint.
And that's something the Pac-12, when it was the Pac-10, did not do. They didn't have a game that week, and so that kind of always put them at a disadvantage because they didn't get that final showing.
Yeah, and I mean, but when you take a look at Robert Griffith, I mean, I watched him 3 times this year, and he was absolutely, dynamic. And then you put in his story. I mean, just an absolutely bright kid. Graduates high school early. He's a world record pace track guy, in the Junior Olympics or whatever he was. Yeah. And then they were like, hey, why don't you come play football? Because that's kind of how he got to Baylor's. Everybody thought he was just going to kind of go and track. And for him to come out, I mean, there's nobody that throws a deep ball better than that guy. And when you're 4 games in and you have, more touchdowns than you have incompletions, as he had, in the first 4 games, I mean, he kind of lit it up at the very beginning of the year. Had that nice game, unbelievable game against Oklahoma, and then he had that chance at the end of the year, and he took advantage of it.
For me, it's I always look at it kind of like baseball. Like you've had one pitcher that's been the MVP in the last 25 years, 2 in the last 25 years. So I tend to always lean to the best quarterback. I could see an argument for the best running back. I thought Trent was going to be number 2, to be honest. I thought that when you just look at the competition that he had, even in the LSU game, would he have almost 200 all-purpose yards?
Yeah, he had a great game.
He's just a machine. And, I mean, you could look at it the same way as you look at, who's 1 and 2 in the country now.
Yeah, I think you can actually, if you looked at it when they were the best and they played the best, Trent Richardson had, he always stepped up. I mean, even in the LSU game, I think he had 89 yards rushing, and then of course another 80-something, receiving that game. And I mean, when you take a look at the stats that they put up, I mean, he was 60% of their offense, that they had that day. So, but if you look at all of the, the tough games that he played, he showed up big in them, and. I think outside of Kent State to start the year, I mean, he pretty much was pretty consistent across the board.
You also got to look at who they have around them. I mean, obviously Alabama's a much better team. I can't imagine Baylor's team is, wonderful. He doesn't have as many weapons, obviously. But, I mean, they definitely made the right decision. I think that's without a doubt.
I really, I don't think they could have went wrong with any of the top 3. If Monty Ball or Honey Badger would have won, I'd have went and took the Heisman from them and broke it on the ground or something.
Yeah.
Not that they're bad players, but Monty Ball was playing with Wisconsin and in a conference that just doesn't compete. I mean, so you take like statistics and you say Richardson in the SEC, Ball in the Big 10, 12, 24, whatever you want to call them. Big 12 now the Big 10, Big 10 now the Big 12.
I was kind of I was between RG3 and Trent Richardson, and I was good with either one of them. But the thing that kind of got me is that I didn't really know that much about RG3. I never saw an interview with him or anything. And then when he got up there and the way that he handled that and the way he talked about Baylor, and it was more about everyone else and not just me, that was kind of refreshing.
Yeah.
And I mean, and obviously he graduated 3 years in bachelor's degree, and he's going to be graduating in May with his master's, and he's going to go to law school. I mean, I think I'd want that guy arguing on my side.
I think he'll go to the NFL first.
Yeah.
But I don't see there'd be anything wrong with any of those three. So,
it is strange that it was so wide open and it ended up not being close.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just kind of.
It was.
Crazy.
I mean, it was fairly close, but I mean, there was a definite divide between 1 and 2 and the rest of the field, and really 1, 2, and 3. Then a huge drop off. I mean, I'm looking at the total points. RG3 had 1687. Andrew Luck had 1407. Then it drops to 978 for Trent Richardson. Then to Monty Ball at 348.
And so, I don't understand the whole. Number one, they have too many people voting, but number two is this whole 1, 2, 3 thing. I'm more the person that you give me who wins, and let's go from there and see truly who has the most. I mean, this whole weighted scale thing is just a little bit rough.
Do you think it's unfair though, just because of the East Coast bias, how they always talk about it, and maybe that's why they do 1, 2, 3? Is that I would assume?
I think it's always unfair. I mean, the East loves to talk about the East, so
and you alluded to it. Andrew Luck has that problem every game except for the one game they played USC. It was in primetime.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times do they have an 11 o'clock start on the East Coast because they're playing the Versus game or whatever channel they're on this year, out on the West Coast, which it's a great game if you're up late. It's great because you don't have to watch the news or Sports Center after a full day of football. You get more football. But most individuals don't stay up and watch some of those games. So
He'll be back in New York here pretty soon, taking home that first pick.
Now this time he'll be holding a jersey and a hat though, with his name on the back. Will that be a blue and white jersey?
That's what it sounds like.
I don't see any way around it.
I think you have two options. I think option one is you pick him and you see how that kind of goes, or two, I mean, and I know a lot of people here would be upset with me saying this, but maybe make the decision, trade Peyton while his value's at the highest. I mean, I understand he's coming off an injury. I still think you could get a lot for him. I mean, at least a couple picks. I
mean, the problem is you got $28 million check that you got to cut in February. I mean, that's the whole deal. He's got a bonus due, $28 million, and you've already paid him $18 million up until today. I saw. So
here's an option, and I haven't heard anyone talk about this, and it just came to me. What about if his rehabilitation is going as well as planned? I mean, isn't he clear to start throwing some now?
Yeah.
So I mean, if Peyton is that person, and he's still got a number of good years left in him, would that not be a valuable trade position for Indianapolis to trade the number 1 pick?
I don't know how the draft is looking, but I mean, you could probably get a Matt Barkley even later in the draft. Like, I agree, trade down.
That's a good question to probably find out because of what the collective bargaining agreement changed last year, because you're not paying the number 1 pick. The reason the number 1 pick was difficult was
Matthew
because
Stafford is the luckiest individual in the world to come out when he did.
You're right.
Or was it Bradford?
No, it was Bradford.
Yeah.
I mean, 53 million or whatever he had.
Yeah, they both are really lucky.
But I mean, that's another thing. I mean, because I think Cam Newton got 23, 24.
I think 20 total. Yeah. Right around
so I mean, that's much more manageable. Which means that if you have Peyton you could make that work. With Peyton Manning and him, because it's not that price tag is not as big as it was before.
Yeah, I think they can make it work. The thing is, though, if you're going to have another 3 years, do you want to keep paying that and waste that first round pick on a guy that's going to be there for 3 years?
I think it's one of those things where you kind of there's a lot of options available to him, but I think it'll be a clearer picture once it becomes. Once it gets into February, and it could be that Manning, pushes back bonuses and that type of stuff to kind of cloud everything.
Rework his contract.
It also depends what other teams are willing to give. I mean, if some team just is going to throw the bus at him, like New Orleans Saints when they went to get Ricky Williams, if somebody's going to offer them 5 draft picks and a stud, maybe defensive player, I mean,
Ditka still says that was a good trade. He said that a couple months ago. So
he also played with barely helmets too. So,
but no, you're right. I mean, there's lots. Everybody keeps talking about how it's Indianapolis's pick, but there's still a lot of options out there for Indianapolis.
Yeah.
It's not a bad place to be, except they're in last place. That's the only bad place that it is. I guess we've covered all the football talk we can. Do you guys want to cover the BCS and the bowl games and kind of look at that. I know since we talked last week on the podcast, and Drew, I hope you're listening to this. Drew Young, our normal co-host over here, congratulations. He's found new employment, so he's in training for the next 2 weeks. So we're going to be a man down, and I didn't even start the program by saying we're a man down. But Drew, hopefully you're going to be listening to this and agreeing or liking what we're able to provide out there. But Drew will be back in one of these seats here in about 3 weeks, so we'll look forward to getting him back. But when Drew and I talked last week, we covered the games because the bowls were announced, but there was no lines. And I think maybe we'll just kind of run through them and just give a couple minutes each and see what we think about the lines. And as I wrote those down, I'll start off and say I was surprised, not at the numbers, but that the SEC has 9 teams and 8 of them are favored. Actually, 7 of them are favored and 2 of them are a pick'em, and that's LSU, Alabama. So, that just goes to show how strong the SEC is, and we'll kind of look through that. And if you want to take it one step further, we're actually 10 teams if you count A&M and Missouri that are favored. So Vanderbilt is going to be hosting, or not hosting, but they're going to be down in Memphis at the Liberty Bowl playing Cincinnati, and they're going to be 2.5-point favorites.
I like Vanderbilt. I think.
And now I will say that next week we're going to do our official picks. So this
I think that's actually good. I mean, Cincinnati, they're 9-3, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But I think the way Vanderbilt's coming in there with James Franklin and actually getting away from Music City to actually go to a bowl game, I think it's going to be a team that's going to be ready to play, and so it's going to be an intriguing matchup because I think Vandy's defense is going to be one of those that's going to be tough for Cincinnati to deal with on the offensive side.
And I've gone back and forth on this one. I saw Cincy play in Knoxville, and it was Tennessee's best game, and obviously disappointing for me as a fan that they're not even in a bowl game, but. It's hard to go back and forth. I could see Cincinnati being really disappointed that they didn't win the Big East. I think they had every opportunity to. They just
it was down to a bunch of tiebreakers.
It really was. I mean, Louisville even had a shot, but what were they, 6-6 or 7-5?
Big East is garbage.
It is.
Sorry.
But, I agree with you, James
Basketball
Franklin.
season, they're not.
Yeah.
He's got those guys playing pretty well all year, up and down, but still at least they were competitive in every game.
Yeah, what I see in this game is which one wins out, SEC defense or Cincinnati's offense? Because Cincinnati's not the same team they were, was it just 2 years ago they were competing for the
13-1 with Zeke Pipe.
National championship all the way up to the last couple of games. They still have a prolific offense. They still can score a lot of points if they want to. But Vandy's defense has become really, really serviceable, and they found an offense with Jordan Rogers.
They can run the football on Cincinnati, too.
So this is going to be an interesting matchup. Like I said, for those who have followed us all along through the season, we'll do our normal picks and give you our picks and get those up on the website next week because we'll use next week's lines. That'll probably be a little truer. There'll probably be a little movement in some of these games to see where the money's actually going to lay.
My other question, I wonder if how the Vandy fans are going to travel.
They've bought almost 10,000 tickets so far, so that's better than what I thought from an allotment standpoint. So I think by the time you'll get into the next couple of weeks. If they can get 15 to 20,000, because there's going to be a lot of fans down in Memphis that are locals that'll buy those seats and watch and root for Vandy. Yeah, so. I wouldn't pay attention to the allotment. That's not really the number to look at. But I think Vandy fans are going to – I think they're going to make this trip. I think they're going to have a decent crowd. And I think it's because the administration. I mean, if they're going to scratch the $7 to $8 million right away to get some things going for Franklin, that's what is being said is the big deal. Not the fact that he got them to 6-6, but that the administration's about to kind of put their money where the mouth is. And I think the fan base is just like any other fan base. It's still ridiculous that the Kentucky game was like it was, but for them. I think they wanted to see what happened, and now that it's happened, I think this is, and how they're selling it is, this is kind of the start of 2012. So let's have let's reward these kids, and I think they'll get some people there.
Yeah, and that's a big win for Vanderbilt. The facilities upgrade alone. I mean, to be the only to play in the SEC and not have an indoor practice facility and have to use is Tennessee State of Division II. Are they even Division II?
Yeah, they're they would be the
FCS.
FCS, yeah.
Still Division II in my world. But, they use their practice facility. So, that's a huge win for Vanderbilt in the recruiting. I mean, they're a top 30 school this year in recruiting. That's only going to make them stronger in the SEC as we go on. Next, we'll look at the Mississippi State game. They're going to be playing in Vanderbilt's hometown of Nashville at the Music City Bowl versus Wake Forest. And they are 7 points favorites.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mullen kind of proved last year that he's got a nice little schedule for a bowl.
When you're giving him 4 weeks, 5 weeks to prepare.
Yeah, and I think it's a good opportunity, and I think you'll see a huge 25,000 plus fans of
ticket sales going well down in Mississippi.
Well, I mean, they sold their allotment before they even announced the bowl, so and it was only a 12,000 allotment, so. It's just one of those deals where they, they just had to, kind of get where they're going. The interesting thing, Shane, you'd probably find this interesting. I follow like 9 beat writers for Mississippi State on Twitter, and by doing that, I have actually seen that there are no beat writers at Wake Forest on Twitter. There's a student newspaper that follows the team, but they're not on Twitter. And so all the beat writers are just baffled because they search for 3 days because they normally pass that information on for fans to be able to kind of get to follow people and kind of get a sense of who the upcoming game's going to be and kind of their side of things. And they're having a hard time getting Wake Forest. It kind of tells you the difference between the ACC and the SEC. I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and one thing that just intrigues me about this game is Wake Forest to me is a team on the slide. I mean, they were a top 25 team, just a few short weeks ago, and they had a loss to Vanderbilt, and was it Clemson? Was that their last 2 games? Or no?
They lost. I think I read they lost 4 games where they had double-digit leads in the second half, and so supposedly they're really young. And Al Grove there has done. He's been there 11 years, and he's about 500, but I mean it's the smallest university in the country. A lot of things that he's going against there. It's kind of a Vandy kind of area. So what he's done there has been pretty remarkable. But I think they have been up and down. I would think they've lost 4 of their last 5 or 5 of their last 6.
Yeah, and I really like State. Yeah, I just think they're going to destroy them. I don't think it's going to really be close.
I've been high on State a lot this year, and they've disappointed me.
Amen, brother.
I guess I drank Dan Mullen's Kool-Aid at the beginning of the season, thinking that that they were going to be a different program, and they were different. They were back to mediocre. But no, given time to prepare, and Wake Forest, like you said, is a young team. They've been on a slide. They've had some really tough losses. I think there's some chinks in that armor. I think 7's not a bad number there. Next, we're going to look at Florida, University of Florida, the Irving Meyer Bowl at Ohio State. Playing Ohio State, Florida's giving 2 to Ohio State, and that's going to be at the Citrus Bowl. And I don't have them written down. Isn't that the Citrus Bowl?
Yeah, it's the Gator Bowl, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, the TaxSlayer.com Gator Bowl.
They're at the Gator Bowl.
Yeah, they. That's. I don't even know what to think about that game. I mean, it's too. I have no clue. I say you just pick them.
Yeah,
they're both. They ended. I mean, Florida ended on a terrible note. Ohio State is going through massive transition.
I would assume Urban Meyer is going to help out the. I mean, if he's allowed to coach with them, I would assume he's going to help them game plan, and he'll at least tell them who the players are.
I think the whole idea was. I think the whole idea was
he was recruiting.
His team is recruiting, and the other team is actually.
Yeah. But I mean, how does that really work? If you're in the same office, and I mean, you can accidentally bump into each other, and
Oh, by the way, did you know that they're good at this? Or this player does this real well. Yeah. No, I see that's going to have to go on now unofficially. What I would love to see more than anything is during a timeout, they go out and they do Ohio, and Irving Meyer comes and dots the I. You want to see some Florida fans just want to go crazy down there. But that 2 points, I don't know. That almost is a pick'em game. We're going to see where that action lies.
Pretty sure I'm not going to watch that one.
Yeah. Next one is Auburn. What bowl is this? 1.5 points.
Chick-fil-A.
Okay, that's going to be in Atlanta, and they're playing Virginia.
Man, Man, that's a tough pick because, I mean, Virginia obviously fell flat against Virginia Tech, and we saw, they didn't show up for the championship and got blown away by Clemson, who had been struggling. So the ACC is kind of garbage anyway.
You got to factor in Dyer there, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and if he's not in there, it's one of those things where you don't really know until you get into a preparation, which typically tends to help the defense start off pretty better. So I like Virginia in this game because I think they got a good story with their coach and kind of what he's been able to do this year. And they had an opportunity to be going to the championship game, and they just fell flat on their face in that game. But I think they take way more momentum in this. And if Dyers could be a distraction, that's going to be pretty tough.
John, what?
Again, this is hard. I mean, Dyer really throws it's tough. And also you got to think Auburn's going to have a huge crowd down there. I think a huge crowd. I mean, it's Georgia's half Auburn anyway. Like, Nashville's pretty heavy with the Auburn fans.
It's a close drive from Auburn. So,
what was the spread again?
Just 2.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 1.5.
So it's basically a pick 'em almost. I'm going to go with Virginia on this one, I think. I just think Dyer, I mean, I don't see it's like you said, the other guys have rushed for 600 yards all season. I mean, there's not a lot of playing time. Auburn should have the speed and the athletes, to better Virginia, but, I think it definitely hurts.
I wouldn't be surprised if this doesn't get taken off of the boards down in Vegas for a day or two with the Dyer suspension coming. And I could see the line moving down at least another, half a point to a point. Mm-hmm. Or maybe even down to a pick-em game.
Well, he's definitely done for the bowl game.
Yeah, he's out
for sure.
But Vegas has. I don't know if when I got these numbers, I don't know if that was announced or if Vegas still has this up on the boards to go against. So that's another good reason to wait, so we can get some of this fallout. Next, we're going to look at South Carolina is given 2 points to Nebraska, and now John, won't you lead us off and tell us what you think about that? And is that the Capital One?
The Capital One in Florida. I'm going to go with South Carolina on that one. I just don't have much respect for Nebraska. I don't think Taylor Martinez is that great. He reminds me of, was it Eric Crouch way back? And I don't even think he's as good as him.
Oh, yeah.
But now Crouch was a Heisman?
He was a real deal now.
Yeah.
I like South Carolina, especially in the state of Florida. I think Spurrier always seems to do well down in that area.
Well, I'm right there with you. I like South Carolina, and their defense is just going to jump all over them. And I think Connor Shaw's kind of coming into his own. I think Spurrier reluctantly having to kind of run that spread option running attack more than throwing the football, and he's kind of he's finally given into it, and it's been successful. And what they did at Clemson and rolling them up was not even funny.
That's kind of what I was thinking. They ended the season on such a great note with that Clemson win.
And they got 2 10-win seasons back-to-back, first time in school history. I mean, there are a lot of disappointed fans because they didn't go to the SEC championship. But when you kind of take back and see what Spurrier's done, give him a little bit of time, that defensive line, I think, will get after them. And they haven't played well in bowl games. I mean, but South Carolina for about a 3 or 4 year stretch would lose 5 out of the last 6. You remember they would kind of get off to a 6-1 or 5-1, and kind of struggling to get to 7-5.
They'd get to the heart of the SEC and have some hiccups.
And so I think that I think Spurrier's trying to get their attention, and I think this should be. I think it's a good matchup for them.
Next, we've got Georgia 3.5 favorites over Michigan State. Now that is the bowl in
that should
Orlando.
Be the Outback, right?
Yes, the Outback Bowl.
Okay,
in Tampa.
In Tampa. So, what do you think there, Blair?
It's 3.5, Georgia.
3.5.
I like that. I mean, Michigan State. I mean, that's going to be a good game.
That's going to be a great game.
That's going to be one of the better games. I think.
You look at some of these matchups. These last few games that we talked about. What's kind of funny is the lower end of the SEC to me, and the higher end of the SEC is where the good matchups are. That middle, you can take it or leave some of those games. That Florida, Auburn,
Mississippi State, Wake Forest. I mean, it's not anything to get excited about.
Yeah, but Vandy, Cincinnati is going to be a great game to watch. This game, and then all the rest of the games. I think great job matching those up. But sorry, I didn't mean.
I do like I like this game. I can see Georgia being the 3.5. I mean, with Aaron Murray and the way he's playing. I mean, Michigan State's not going to be LSU, and I think they can run the football on them, and I think their defense is solid.
As much as I don't believe in Georgia and Mark Richt, I think I'm gonna pick them in this game. I mean, it's really hard to. They're so
coming from a Tennessee fan, yeah.
Well, I mean, look what they did in the SEC championship. I mean, I'm not gonna say that they should have beat LSU, but they lost it. They were up 10-0, and then it was over. So you never know with them. But again, I think that they're gonna travel really well down to Tampa, and I think that they're gonna win.
Yeah, and news in Georgia is Rick's going to get a contract extension.
Yeah, that's what they're saying today.
It's so funny to hear, 2 games into the season that, he's on his way out to now at the end of the season he's turned it around and looking at an extension.
Yeah, wasn't there rumors him going to Texas A&M too, which kind of started that whole thing. But now we got to take into consideration this. Wasn't it Michigan State that just got their living doors blown off of them by Alabama last year in this same game?
I think so.
Yeah, because didn't Alabama beat them like 38?
No, that would have been a BCS game, right?
No, I don't think so. Not last
when
year.
They were 11-1. No.
Yeah, remember they all finished with a 3-way tie last year, and they're the ones that were the odd ones out.
Okay.
So Ohio State went and played at Arkansas in the big debacle in the Sugar Bowl, and I can't remember who else was the other one. Wisconsin, I guess, went and played in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
So Michigan State was the team that kind of lost out on that deal, and they went down pretty disappointed and got ever more handed to them against an Alabama team that we all sat there last year going, boy, when they ever put it together, and they put it together in that one bowl game, it was pretty impressive. So, Michigan State's going to have that on their minds. So I think that they'll play a little bit more inspired than they did last year.
They're definitely well coached.
Yeah.
And, I mean, they gave Wisconsin all they could handle. Really, I mean, they obviously, I think, a little luck in the first game on the Hail Mary, but the second game, I mean, they had an opportunity to win the same, so it definitely is going to be a good game.
And even though their record wasn't the same as they were last year, I think it's a good Michigan State program. I mean, they had they beat Michigan, right, this year?
Who's that?
Michigan State.
I believe so.
I mean, they had some good quality wins.
They beat Wisconsin. They beat.
I mean, for their losses were disappointing, but they had some really good wins as well. And I was getting ready to pull their schedule up, but I think you're on it, John.
I'm trying to get there.
No, that's fine. But I think that's going to be an interesting game. But I'm like you guys. I am going to take Georgia. I would if I had to pick it today, it'd be Georgia. I mean, I think they're a touchdown favorite, really. And you almost got it there.
Yeah. Well, they beat Ohio State. They beat Michigan. They beat Wisconsin. And, then their losses came 3 points to Wisconsin in the championship game. They lost to Nebraska. And
Nebraska was somewhat of a surprise.
Yeah, they also lost to Notre Dame in the beginning of the season, third game in. So
that's right.
That's the one. That's the one that kind of took them out of things quick. Next, we got the Cotton Bowl in Jerry's.
That's going to be a good
Jerry
one.
Dome.
Jerry's home. Arkansas is given 8 to Kansas State.
I think that's a pretty big number.
It is a big number. That's going to be a fun game to watch.
Well, you want to watch this game because that quarterback for Kansas State he's kind of a throwback, the guy that does everything, and he's a little bit undersized. And I remember Kurt Herbstreit basically saying here locally on radio about 6th week of the season that if you get a chance to watch Kansas State, watch this kid because how he goes is how they go. I mean, he's truly a throwback that just does everything. And, man, he was fantastic to watch. So they can move the ball, and I think they can move the ball on Arkansas. And then Arkansas obviously can move it on anybody. So, I mean, that one's going to be, I think, a little bit of a high-scoring affair. And I'm pretty surprised. You said how much was it, 8?
8.
That's a pretty high number.
Yeah, and I kind of agree. I think it's going to be high scoring. I mean, if you look when they played Oklahoma State, I think it was like 59, and they scored in the 40s. Same type of team as Arkansas with Oklahoma State. They can score a lot, not much defense. So I think you're going to look at the exact type of same game.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun game to watch that one. We'll cover the 2 other outside the new SEC teams. Texas A&M's given 10 to Northwestern, so a 6-6 team with a new coach waiting in the wings is given 10 points to Northwestern.
I like A&M. I don't really think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be a blowout.
Yeah, and it's going to be in Texas, right? Yeah, it's like the Meineke Car something bowl in Texas.
Yeah, it's at the Meineke Car Care of Texas. Yeah, at Reliance Stadium in Houston. So
yeah. So I mean, that's right down their alley. I think they'll be ready to go.
And then Missouri is giving 4 to North Carolina.
I like Missouri. North Carolina is one of those schools. I mean, they just, I guess are they going to have a new coaching staff for the bowl game?
I don't know.
It's who knows. I mean, but yeah, I'm going to go with Missouri. Missouri, they had some good games this year. I thought they played pretty well.
And we won't we're just going to say that the national championship game is LSU Alabama. We're going to wait for any conversation on that for next week there on that game, because that game is a pick 'em right now out in Vegas, so it's anyone's ball game.
I would assume it's going to stay like that. I mean, do y'all have any? Unless somebody gets suspended or something, I can imagine it really to change much.
Yeah, I think it actually started out at 1.5 and dropped down. So there was some money went towards Alabama, and I think it's going to stay that way.
It was funny. There's the I can't think of their name, but they actually simulate the game like 50,000 times. And that's how they actually come out with their predictors. It's like, I forget what it is, but for this game, it comes out as an average of Alabama 15.8 points to LSU 15.7 points. So barely, it's like 50.48% of the time Alabama wins. So it's about as even as it can be, even from a simulated standpoint, which I thought was pretty interesting this week, I heard.
So that's the slate of the bowl games. And like I said, next week we'll get our picks out on those as well for everyone, so you can see those up on the website sometime next week as well. I said we were going to probably keep this one shorter than they have been, but it doesn't seem like it's happened that way. And we still haven't even touched on basketball. And there was last week we talked about the SEC Big East Challenge. This week there wasn't a whole lot of action going on. And we'll cover it a little bit because there was one game of importance, at least to me and to most fans in the SEC. But we were talking beforehand when we were doing our prep work about the Tennessee game yesterday against Austin Peay, and just how few fans were in the stands.
It's just really disappointing. I was saying earlier, you had a lot of people last year. They were 20,000 strong to no-name teams at the beginning of the year, and they had maybe 6,000-7,000 this past weekend on a Saturday.
Yeah,
and then on top of that, to lose to Austin Peay at home, it's just things aren't good.
Yeah,
the best way to put it.
I just saw it. You could have dropped a pipe bomb in one of the sections and not even hurt anybody.
Yeah, it was.
So it was when I saw it on TV, I was just totally blown away. But it's like we were talking about it. Tennessee's better than I thought they were going to be. He's getting more out of them than I thought, and some kids that that didn't even see the floor with Pearl are obviously providing some good spark, but they're still going to struggle.
It's really tough. They really don't have any leadership. Yeah. That's the one thing they're missing. I couldn't name one person who I would really consider the leader of that team. Maybe Maimon, and I don't really know much about him. He had a good start. Him and Trey Golden both had a good start to the season. I think they've both been a little flat in the last couple games.
What's really going to hurt them is that they've had some really bad losses at the beginning of the season here, because it's not going to get any easier when they get into SEC play. They're going to have Kentucky twice, Florida twice, Vanderbilt twice, and then Georgia twice. And of course South Carolina, but we're not worried too much about them. But 3 of those 4 teams or 5 teams are really good. And the fourth one, Georgia, is not a bad team.
Right.
So they're gonna have a tough way to go, and I don't even see an NIT in their future.
The problem with them is they just don't have a consistent inside presence. Like I said again, Maimon, but after you get past him, I have no faith in anyone.
Yeah, it's just funny to see. It's not even funny as a Kentucky fan. I still didn't want to see this, but the fall that Tennessee had. It just shows how fickle their fans are. Because you go from packing in a great arena. The improvements you've done to that facility over there in Knoxville, it's a great place to watch a ball game.
Yeah, I think before Bruce Pearl got there, the women, they didn't bag any of the seats, and for the men's games they would bag a bunch of the seats, and then Pearl gets there and they're not bagging anything, and they're selling out the 20,000+.
And as a Tennessee fan, we joke about it because they call them the black curtains, and that's literally what they do. They black curtain half the arena to not make it look as bad on TV. Right. And it's when Bruce was there, it was never even a thought. Yeah. It was kind of a joke, and just losing him, it's really crushed the program. I couldn't even imagine the numbers, but I would assume the women are doing double, if not, 3 times as many seats as the men.
And I like Concept Martin. I think he's going to be I think he's got the ability to be a really good coach. He's just going to be a different style. He's not going to be Bruce Pearl, but he's going to have some growing pains, especially over this year. And it depends on his recruiting.
They
for
need
next
Stokes.
year. Yeah,
I mean, they need Stokes bad.
yeah.
Yeah, and real quickly, some of the other surprises so far is Mississippi, 8-1 starting off.
Yeah.
I mean, they've had some, their schedule. Of course, it's the beginning of the season, but still, you wouldn't expect that Mississippi to. You were expecting, at least me, I was expecting Mississippi to struggle a little more than they have.
Well, they got a nice win at DePaul in the Big East. They let a huge lead go and then fumble the way down to the end, and actually in a pretty chaotic last 30 seconds ended up coming away, and so that was on the road. But they've got some, like I was telling y'all before. I mean, they've got some good. They're probably as athletic as they've been. They're pretty lengthy, and they still got 2 players that haven't even played yet, and that's their best player. He's the only McDonald's All-American, which is coming in hopefully here within the next week. So they got a legitimate chance to kind of be maybe that oddball team to sneak in with the NCAA tournament. So we'll see.
Yeah, and if you look at their record. I said they're 8-1, but their one loss was the only loss they had was to a ranked team. They've had wins against
Marquette, right? I think it was.
Yeah, it was, and it was a bad loss.
I mean, Marquette's good though.
Yeah, they put a 30-point loss on them, but their wins, they've had 3 of their last 4 have been really good quality wins. They're not top 25 teams, but Miami down in Florida, DePaul, and then Penn State. Yeah. So I mean, you've got some pretty decent teams that you're playing there, and to have some wins there. The other things in the SEC that just stand out to me, and you guys chime in anytime you want. Mississippi State, they're doing everything that you expect them to do. They're actually leading right now, and
I tell you what, they're playing really well right now, and the one thing that State has that they haven't had in the past is they've got they've got a quality win in Madison Square Garden with Texas A&M, who is a ranked team, Arizona, who is a ranked team, and won that tournament. Then they came back with West Virginia and beat them at home. So you put those 3 together. They've got a loss to Akron at home, which hurts, but Akron's actually probably going to be an NCAA tournament team. They're a pretty stout mid-major, and they had a little bit of trouble. But the interesting thing about Mississippi State is they've got a good nucleus of kids. I mean, like I was saying, they got D. Bost, who is just playing really, really well. He's about as good as you can get from a league guard standpoint. And then, Arnett Moultrie, who I mentioned, before we started talking about basketball, was the 6'11" kid that was transferring in from UTEP, and he's just played. He's basically been better than what my expectations were, and what it's done is it actually has made Renardo Sidney, who had to have 24 points and 10 rebounds last year for us to have a shot to win, and put a lot of pressure on that kid, who obviously can't deal with it. It's kind of put him in the back burner, so he's kind of a 3rd, 4th, even 5th option. And sometimes when they take him off the bench, it doesn't shake up the team like it did last year. So they got a lot of good options.
How's Jalen Steele doing this year?
He's doing
a
well.
Knoxville kid.
Yeah.
I knew a lot about him coming out. It was really surprising me that Tennessee really never went after him right in their his own backyard.
That's one thing Rick Stansbury's done, and I don't know if you remember Barry Stewart that played there the last couple of years. Had a 4-year run there, and was a 2-guard that was on the team. Was a senior when Kentucky beat them in the SEC championship game in the last second. He was a kid that was from Shelbyville, and he was a kid that Stansbury didn't have a scholarship, and actually went to 3 OVC coaches and said he will be an OVC Player of the Year, and none of them would even talk to him, and all of a sudden a scholarship became available. He offered it to him, and 4 years later he had the most starts ever in the history of Mississippi State. I mean, he just went down as one of the better solid players, and Stansbury's done that. Jalen Steele was kind of a last second. He wanted him, but he didn't have a scholarship. He kind of came about, but the one thing Stansbury said is that number one, He could shoot free throws. He's a dead-eye shooter. And he blew out his knee last year, in the LSU game, and he's come back. And I'm really excited about him because he's the guy that I like in the starting five. They've got a Brian Bryant, who's a senior, who's a transfer JUCO player. To me, he's up and down. I don't really like him. I'm not a big fan. But Jalen Steele, beginning of the year, was still kind of recovering. He wasn't at full strength, and he's kind of getting there. I think once we get into mid-January, he's going to be a guy. I mean, you leave him open, he's stepping into a three.
He's a deadly three-point shooter, yeah.
And so I really like him. He's kind of a gutsy kid. He's kind of one of those hard-nosed. Doesn't really say a lot probably. He just kind of goes out and does his job, and you need a lot of those to keep going. So I think they've got a good. The Rodney Hood, who's a 6'8" true freshman, you'll hear his name all through the SEC play. If you watch him play, he's left-handed, and he is about as smooth as you can be from a freshman standpoint. He's never in a hurry, never gets rushed up with anything. He's got an unbelievable pump fake, gets people in the air. He's got a good mid-range game. He's probably one of the better players the State's ever had that I think coming in. So a lot of nice pieces. And I still think, like we were talking about, they're going to be playing the west side of the schedule.
Yeah,
they're going to get Kentucky, Vanderbilt, and Tennessee, and Florida once. And so that's good. And they get Kentucky and I think Kentucky and Vanderbilt, if I'm not mistaken, at home. No, Vanderbilt's here.
So you're going to distribute any cell phone numbers this year?
We'll try our best. But it'll be, I like where they're going. I was a little bit down on them after the Akron loss, and because it was a typical Stansbury loss, and I voiced my opinion about that a few podcasts ago. So. But I think they're going to be a strong contender to get up into a pretty nice seeding.
Well, the last team we'll talk about that shows any surprises to me is really Vanderbilt. They were top preseason, top 10?
Yeah,
yes.
Seventh.
It's between 7 and 4 in the two different. Yeah, I've seen.
And you really, really see how much they missed Festus Ezeli with those losses. I mean, second game of the season, Cleveland State just really got drummed against, which Cleveland State's a pretty decent little team.
But if you're going to be ranked 10th in the country, you got
to beat Cleveland State. Then the last two losses they have are to ranked opponents. Number 12 Xavier and number 6 Louisville. So you've got some quality teams there. But you look at the individual leaders of the team, and Festus Ezeli came back for their win against Davidson, and he leads the team with blocks at 2.
Well, plus their other center breaks his foot, and he's out 6 to 8 weeks.
So
the backup.
Oh gosh.
So thankfully,
was it Ching Chang?
No, it's the. I think he's a freshman. Is it Henderson?
Oh, okay. So it's a freshman.
Okay.
Yeah, whoever was playing over for Ezeli, the other center on their roster.
But Vanderbilt. Hopefully they're going to be the same Vanderbilt everybody thought they were at the beginning of the season. Now that he's back, I think he only played 15 minutes against Davidson and had 20 points or something like that. So, I mean, when he was in, he was very effective. It's going to take him a game or two to get his legs back. And,
and it's like Stalin said. I mean, at the beginning of the year, he's like, everybody's talking about this could be a Final Four contending type of team, talent standpoint. He said, we got to go in and win an NCAA game first before we do anything. And so, the troubling thing is, I mean, if you watched them play Louisville, they played Louisville in Louisville, and had control of that game with 3 minutes to go, and then just totally fell apart.
Yeah.
And Xavier did the exact same thing, and they even did it with the kid that was at Vanderbilt last year.
And Tennessee did the same thing against Louisville.
Yeah.
Did they not? Last week, was it Louisville they played in the Big East Challenge?
No, it was Duke and Memphis.
No, that's not
Tennessee?
Big East. No, who did they play in the Big East?
I'll look it up real quick. You keep talking.
No, because Vanderbilt played Louisville in the Big East. But that's what Vanderbilt's problem has been. And now they're going to have a little bit of a kind of filling out process with Festus, because they kind of got to work him back in the lineup. But it's the same thing. I mean, the other night,
it was Pitt. Tennessee
played Pitt at home, yeah.
That's right. And, it's just one of those things where they get in late game situations. Jenkins is not a leader at all, and he's not a guy that can go get the basketball and create his own shot. I mean, he still can't do it to the level that you need him to do it. But you leave him open, he's good. And then you got the what's the other kid? The Taylor, Jeffrey Taylor. He has 30 points against Davidson, and they basically go to the wire at Davidson. So they still have this leadership issue, and they still have the ball handling. If you pressure them and their guards, it's still a troublesome spot for them. And so I'll be interested to kind of see over the next 5 games how they kind of work in before they get into SEC play, work Festus in.
But I think having that guy, that big man down low, will make a big difference.
It'll make a big difference.
And help relieve some of those pains that they're having because they've got that person they can dish it to down low that they haven't had. The next team we'll talk about, and I wouldn't say it was a surprise. Kentucky had a tough 3-game stretch.
Yeah. And
they came in and they had an Indiana program that is on fire. They came into a facility that was ready to face Kentucky. I mean, that place was loud. They were all about it, and you really saw Kentucky not play their best either.
Yeah.
I mean, you had anything that could go wrong that day. I mean, it did for Kentucky.
the problem is that Kentucky, all I got to do is make free throws and foul.
Yes.
I mean, they did the boneheaded plays at the end, but they missed 3 free throws in the last minute.
You really saw their youth really show up. I mean, Terrence Jones, he disappeared. It looked like he was pouting
they
on the
benched him.
bench.
That's, I mean, Calipari, came in and benched him towards the I think the final 6 minutes of the game, which is that's your All-American type player. I mean, he's supposed to be your your leader. And even on the last play, Calipari, what you guys just said, he was really upset that they didn't foul. They had a couple fouls to give, and they let him shoot that 3. Not that it was an easy shot, but still, they could have fouled the guy dribbling the ball and give him a lot less time.
There's lots of things they could have done, and I can't say that. I don't know. Maybe that needs to fall on Calipari. I don't know what they did in the huddle beforehand, but did he remind them, hey, you've got fouls to give?
Yeah, he basically threw them under the bus at the press conference.
Yeah.
It said that the whole timeout was spent that we got 2 fouls and that we need to give them a foul except for them in a shooting motion. And
okay,
and then if you see him in the replay afterwards, he's doing that because it was just one of those things. The weird thing is that the kid made him. He made on the initial pass, he made the guy actually change directions, but then they just allowed the guy to drive all the way to the elbow, and then pivot and pitch it back. So, it was a great play by Indiana, but Kentucky didn't make the kid. You got to make him turn again, some way, shape, or form. So it was it's one of those things where you got to make free throws, and and if Lamb, if he can put that little circle with the 3 over his eyes, he can make free throws, can he?
I was having this discussion with somebody else the other day.
He was 7 of 11 at the line. He wasn't terrible. I mean, it's more than 50%.
Who's the leader on that team? Is it Darius Miller? It should be Terrence Jones. I mean, he should be one of them. But are you always going to run into this cycle of things when you're constantly having 3, 4, 5 people that are going to be one and dones? I mean, is it kind of always going to be? Who do they look to at the end of the game? There's not that one person that if I was the coach, I would feel comfortable just.
I mean, but the thing about it is that Indiana played about as well as they could play. Kentucky didn't play well, and then Kentucky still made mistakes to lose the game. So all Kentucky has to do is make one play, and they win the freaking ball game.
Yeah, I mean,
and so that just tells you how talented they are. And the other thing that Calipari does, which I think is truly amazing, I'm not a big Calipari fan, but for a guy that actually gets young kids that are one and done, he gets them to play with an effort, especially on the defensive end, that you don't see a lot of people get freshmen and young kids to play with. And it's just amazing that he gets them bought in, and he plays, and he'll bench Terrence Jones and those types of things. I mean,
a top 5 lottery pick next season.
Yeah, I mean, what's the big galoot that y'all had with the knucklehead that all the state fans called? Well, I just went blank on him.
Cousins?
Yeah, Cousins. I mean, he was the biggest hothead, and him and Calipari went at it every game. But he would sit him down, and he would scream and yell and do everything. And a lot of coaches, when they have a player like that, they don't treat him that way. And that's the one thing that he does is that for some reason or another, he has that magic touch in getting them to play. The problem is that when you get into the tournament and you get into those scenarios, that's where the faults come into, because you just don't have that experience there.
Yeah, they do not want to play an experienced team in the tournament. I would assume that's going to be, no matter what the seed is, I think they're going to be pretty worried about that. I mean, again, talent should win out, but if they start getting, you don't know what freshmen are going to do when they're in that situation, because it's going to be, let's be honest, I mean, they're always going to win a ton of games. It should be a pretty easy cakewalk through the SEC. They're not going to get, I mean, they're going to get challenged, but I don't think it's going to be, maybe some of the older teams, but, it's going to be, what's going to happen when they get in the tournament and it's not going their way? Are they going to be able just to use their athleticism and their talent to pull out a win?
But who is there out there right now that's a really senior laden team? I mean, there may be a mid-major that kind of jumps up that's like a Butler or something, but I mean, I don't see like a UConn.
Duke's got a lot of experience,
Duke.
I think.
I mean, but Duke's got some experience, but their level, their ceiling isn't near what a Duke should be. I mean, they got the Plumlee kids and those types of things, but it's going to be interesting as it plays out. I'm getting a little bit excited about basketball. So,
well, here's what the Kentucky game said to me. For all the bad that there was, and there was a lot of bad. I mean, we missed a lot of free throws. We weren't that good from the 3-point line. We already talked about Terrence Jones and his just disappearance in the ball game. But you were asking about leadership. I think Deron Lamb really stepped up and showed some leadership and took some ownership of that team, and kind of said, "Guys, try to put. I'm going to put you on my back and see where we can go with it." Also saw that they didn't give up. I mean, they were at one point down 10 points with under 5 minutes to go, 6 minutes to go, and they actually came back and had the lead. Except for a couple boneheaded plays at the end, they were actually in position to come back and win this game. So they didn't give up. They found some leadership. Michael Kidd Gilchrist is going to be the real deal. He's going to be awesome. So what it did show me was that for all for the loss, at the end of the season, when you're looking at Indiana, you're not going to see a team that's outside the top 25. You're going to see a top 15, top 10 program in Indiana when the season gets done, because they are a good team. They've got some great talent there. But you see a Kentucky team that didn't give up, that for all the bad, almost still had a chance to win this game. So that's the benefit you got to look at the silver lining, because as you get into the rest of this season, there's only one more game out there from a Kentucky standpoint that's going to give them a big hiccup before they get to the SEC, and that's Louisville. And they face them right after Christmas. And Louisville's the Louisville of old. They're a top 5 team this year.
Yeah.
Right now.
I mean, it's always going to be close in that game, I think. There's very few blowouts. It's just the talent level of both teams is usually pretty solid. Plus, the whole.
Yeah, and I watched that Kentucky game last night with a bunch of Louisville fans, the old in-laws. So
they were loving that game. They were happy,
thoroughly excited.
And so I won't say that that's going to be their only loss, because you guys know as well as I do, to go play an away game in the SEC, it doesn't matter if it's football or basketball, is a very difficult thing to do. And when you're Kentucky, you've got that bullseye on your chest, and everybody, you can go to Thompson Bowling Arena and you can see that place had 4,000 or 5,000 people in it last week, but they could not win a single game. And when Kentucky comes into town, that place is going to be nothing but orange, and they're going to be rooting against Kentucky.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is in every arena in the SEC when Kentucky comes into play. So I can tell you that they're going to win every game, because it's just so hard to do.
Yeah, they're going to take an L in Starkville too this year.
Are they?
Yeah.
So, for all that, Kentucky fans that are ready to jump off the ledge because they lost one game to an unranked Indiana team, come back. It's not over. It's still a lot of good basketball left, and there was a lot of good to take away from that game. But that's about it for the roundtable. We've covered the full gamut. As you see, we're starting to get some more basketball talk woven in here, and as the season progresses, we're going to get to see more and more. SEC play is only a mere 3 weeks away or so.
Yeah.
I mean, and then like the football program, we're going to do our SEC picks. We're not going to worry about basketball picks outside the SEC. So we're going to just pick some SEC games. So there's 16 games there that we'll all be picking from the roundtable, and let's see how well we do. I know Blair, myself, and Brett absolute maniacs in picking football. Let's see how well that transfers over to our basketball knowledge. But with that, we close the roundtable every week with an open mic, and we're going to let Blair kick us off and tell us anything on your mind, basketball, baseball, non-sports.
I'm actually looking forward to the Music City Ball here. I get to do that here locally, and I'm getting pretty anxious for the bowl season. Holidays come around, and start of the new year, so it's a good time. And I'm ready for spring because it's too freaking cold outside.
Twitter?
Yes, Twitter at Blair Smiley, SMYLY, and one of these days I'll actually tweet something.
There we go. John, thank you so much for coming out here. I know if you there's no way anyone knows this except me and John, but me and him have gone back and forth with direct messages on Twitter for about 2 months now, trying to get some arrangements to get you over here. So we're thankful that you're able to make it for us and come to the round table. Let you have the open mic. Tell them your Twitter and anything sports or non-sports on your mind before we close this one up.
Yeah, well, first off, I just want to say thanks for having me. It really has been 2 months. I've been out of town a lot. I was on vacation. So my Twitter is John_Schultz, SCHULTZ. Open talk. I mean, it's hard right now. I mean, I'm a Tennessee fan. It's just it's a lot of unknown. I was on a cruise and I came back and I looked at the bowl projections and I didn't see Tennessee, so that pretty much gave away that we lost, and I was almost in shock. I couldn't believe it. I think that there's good things to look forward to for sure with football, and I hopefully with basketball. It takes time. You can't no team in the SEC has nothing and then just overnight builds it up to consistently get 10 wins. So I think that for all you fans out there, stick with it. At least give Dooley at least another year, see how he does with his players and with some more talent. And that's it. Just thanks for having me, and hopefully I'll be back soon.
Well, great. We're very glad to have you, and definitely get you back on. My Twitter is at @PShaneBailey, and I'll remind everybody that that all of our personal Twitters might not get some football, but if you just like to hear what we have to say in general, we'd love for you to follow us there. So do follow us personally. We'll be happy to share our insights that way. I'd be remiss to not try to mention a movie because Drew's not here. Drew's always good for a movie review or some snide comment about some sort of movie. And, Christmas is around the corner, and I've seen my fair share of Christmas specials, and I'm done with them.
Are you?
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I was actually going to add is that I had a buddy of mine that actually rented out the Thoroughbred one Saturday morning, and for kids, and I've got a 2-year-old that just turned 2 on Friday, and I took him to see the Muppets. And let me tell you, for a 2-year-old to first kind of go to the big screen was kind of interesting. But I thoroughly enjoyed the Muppets because if you're my age, 35 to 40, it has got a lot of what you grew up in with regard to the Muppets. So it's definitely something, if you got little kids, go and take them, buy them a popcorn. It's good stuff. And then possibly see 3 other movies like Drew and not pay for them.
We
didn't hear that.
We did cover the Muppets. I think Drew went and saw that last week. He gave a review, so you had to make it to the 2.5 hour mark. Not really. It was just me and Drew, so we weren't quite that long last week. But he saw that, and I went and saw Arthur Christmas.
Nice.
But I'm done with I have a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, and it's like every night it's Frosty the Snowman, or yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus, or the 25 Days of Christmas on ABC Family. And I love Christmas, don't get me wrong, but I am done with those specials. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I don't remember why did we find these cartoons so interesting when we were kids? Because they're awful.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody goes, "Oh, they're such a classic." I don't have to ever watch them again.
Yeah, it's definitely something that it gets ramped up once December turns around, or after Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
is when that actually starts rolling in. Try not to have your kids born anytime in December because it makes it pretty tough. Because I've got a son on December 9th, and that makes the birthday and Christmas kind of an interesting month. That's for sure.
Proper planning is important.
Proper budgeting is more like it.
That too. So with that, we'll call the budgeting issue. We're going to wrap it up on that note. Guys, thanks so much for joining us, and this roundtable's done. Thanks.